To this day, I cannot fathom the horrors that transpired in that cursed, forsaken town of Angel Lake. The oppressive dread that hung in the air, even before you set foot there, was enough to make the bravest soul hesitate. But what my friend and I witnessed in that place, what we experienced, is something I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. Even now, merely hearing the name Angel Lake sends a chill through me, a nauseating wave of regret and revulsion. That place clings to my nightmares like a malevolent shadow, its darkness infecting my every restless night. We didn't go there for cheap thrills or some morbid curiosity. There was no reckless quest for urban legends or thrill-seeking that led us there. No, it all began innocently enough, born of our shared passion for the macabre and the mysterious. I was a student enthralled by anthropology and history, while my friend had a deep fascination with folklore and mythology. Together, we reveled in exploring humanity's darkest chapters, the enigma of the Roanoke colony, grotesque crimes etched in blood, and the unspeakable mysteries that history tends to bury. Ghost towns held a particular allure for us. These eerie, lifeless remnants of once thriving communities seemed to whisper secrets from the past that no history book could ever fully capture. There was a stillness to them, a silence that carried the weight of countless untold stories. We speculated on the reasons behind their abandonment, crop failures, famine, rebellion, or sometimes just the simple desire to leave it all behind. But Angel Lake was different. Its abandonment defied explanation. Angel Lake's history is shrouded in murk and silence. Established in the 1800s, it thrived briefly before vanishing from the map in 1936. The inhabitants didn't simply leave, they vanished, as though plucked from existence. No records, no letters, no signs of migration. Just an eerie void where lives had once been. My friend and I scoured every source we could find, dusty tomes and obscure websites, but all we unearthed were whispers, rumors of dark rites, of cursed ground. The indigenous peoples had long shunned the area, speaking in hushed tones of malevolent forces that thrived there. When Spanish explorers came, they gave the lake a name that should have been warning enough: El Lago de los Diablos, the Lake of Devils. Their accounts were vague but chilling, mentioning strange lights in the sky, unnatural wails in the night, and an overwhelming sense of dread that drove them away. The settlers who followed renamed it Angel Lake, hoping to erase its sinister reputation. But no saintly name could cleanse that place. Stories persisted. Tales of witches gathering in shadowed glens, Sabbaths under a blood moon, and villagers snatched away by winged horrors that emerged from the lake itself. Others spoke of lights descending from the heavens, extraterrestrial hunters scouring the town for prey. These were no bedtime stories. They were warnings ignored at our peril. Drawn by a dangerous mix of curiosity and naivety, we ventured to Angel Lake. It seemed a historian's dream, a folklorist's treasure trove, but what we found was a nightmare that defied all reason. I've tried to piece together what we saw, tried to shape it into words that could make sense of the madness. But the truth of Angel Lake resists explanation, as if speaking it aloud would summon its darkness once more. My friend and I, in a moment of reckless curiosity, decided to venture to Angel Lake. We thought ourselves explorers, seekers of history and hidden truths. Our plan was simple: snap a few photos of crumbling relics, poke around the decaying remains of the town, and piece together the mystery of why its people had vanished. It wasn't far from our hometown, just a few hours' drive. That proximity made it all the more tempting. But now, looking back, I would give anything to undo that decision. Angel Lake is not a place one visits, it's a place that consumes. The journey began with eager speculation. My friend, ever the believer in the unexplainable, was spinning theories about the supernatural. He wasn't superstitious in a shallow sense. He didn't trust horoscopes or carry lucky charms. But he held a quiet belief that the world hid truths too dark and strange for science to untangle. I, the skeptic, laughed off his musings as we drove deeper into desolation. By the end of that trip, neither of us would believe in anything rational again. As we approached Angel Lake, the road itself seemed to change. The pavement cracked and crumbled, giving way to jagged dirt paths. The air thickened, weighed down by an unnatural silence. Even with the windows rolled down, there were no sounds, no chirping insects, no distant birdsong. Only the faint rustle of grass, like something unseen, was moving just out of sight. The closer we got, the more the landscape seemed to decay. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across forgotten valleys, and the mountains loomed like jagged teeth against a blood-tinged sky. By the time we arrived, it was evening. The light was dying, leaving the town cloaked in a heavy, oppressive twilight. The first cottages we passed were weathered beyond recognition, ancient, skeletal structures, leaning precariously as if they might collapse under the weight of their secrets. Excited by the sight of such antiquity, we stopped briefly to snap pictures. That was our first mistake. I still don't know if it was the camera's flash or simply our presence, but something stirred. When the road became impassable, we abandoned the car and continued on foot. The moment we stepped out, the atmosphere shifted. The air was damp and cloying, saturated with the smell of wet earth and rot. The ground squelched beneath our feet, thick with mud from recent rain. The trees around us seemed to sag, their blackened trunks glistening as though slit with some foul substance. Overhead, unseen birds let out strange, warbling cries that echoed like faint whispers in a cavern. As we moved further into Angel Lake, the feeling of isolation became unbearable. The town was no longer a ghost, it was a trap, a decaying labyrinthine snare that seemed to swallow the fading light. The silence deepened, punctuated only by the occasional skitter of something in the underbrush, too quick and too quiet to be seen. The cottages grew closer together now, their warped frames leaning as if conspiring against us. It was here, among the ruins, that the true weight of the place began to press upon us. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder to draw. There was something wrong with Angel Lake, something that seeped into your bones and refused to let go. My friend and I exchanged nervous glances, our earlier excitement now replaced with an annoying sense of dread. This was no ordinary abandoned town. Angel Lake wasn't just empty, it was waiting. And whatever it was waiting for, it had noticed us. At last, our eyes settled on the shadowy outline of the town at the forest's edge. The sight should have thrilled us. It was the reason we had ventured this far after all. But as we stood there, gazing at the dilapidated ruins shrouded in gloom, neither of us could summon excitement. Instead, a heavy, unshakable sense of dread crept over us, gnawing at our resolve. The town seemed to exude an almost tangible hostility, as if it knew we were intruding where we didn't belong. It sounds absurd to say, but the longer we stared at it, the more I felt something watching us in return. My friend must have felt it too. His voice wavered slightly as he asked if I was ready to go inside. Forcing a casual tone, I lied, claiming I just wanted to take in the view a little longer. He nodded, uneasy, and we exchanged a hollow laugh before stepping forward, pretending to be braver than we truly were. The streets of Angel Lake were eerily still, lined with the skeletons of buildings frozen in decay. Signs from long-abandoned shops hung limp and rusted, swaying faintly in the breeze. Porches sagged under the weight of forgotten wooden furniture, some pieces overturned as if the occupants had left in a hurry. It felt wrong, profoundly wrong to be here. The absence of life was so complete it became oppressive, suffocating. Normally, in any neighborhood, you'd expect some sign of activity. Lights glowing in windows, distant voices, the occasional passerby. But here, the emptiness was absolute, like the town itself had been drained of more than just its people. We considered entering the houses, curious to see what secrets they might hold, but something about them repelled us. Their gaping doorways and shattered windows felt less like openings and more like mouths waiting to swallow us whole. The shadows inside were too deep, too alive, as though something was lurking just beyond sight, biding its time. The descending twilight only amplified the unease, shrouding the town in grim, unnatural darkness. We pressed on, taking pictures and pointing out details to each other, feigning interest in the architecture to mask our growing fear. My friend made comments about the old storefronts and peculiar houses, but I could tell he was as unsettled as I was. The fear between us was palpable, a shared burden we didn't dare acknowledge aloud. Still, something about the town pulled at me, a morbid curiosity I couldn't ignore. In the heart of the plaza, an old rectangular building caught my eye. Its faded sign read Angel Lake Newspaper Agency. I pointed it out, and for a moment, my friend's unease seemed to lift, replaced by cautious excitement. Surely, if there was any place that might reveal the town's story, it was here. Together, we pushed open the warped, splintering door, stepping into the stale, suffocating air of the abandoned office. Inside, chaos greeted us. Desks lay overturned, typewriters and filing cabinets scattered haphazardly across the room, as though the occupants had fled in a hurry. Dust coated everything in a thick, undisturbed layer, muffling our footsteps as we moved. The atmosphere was suffused with an eerie stillness, as if time itself had frozen here, refusing to march forward. We sifted through the remnants of the past papers with headlines from the 1930s, unfinished articles describing national events and local happenings. It became clear that the journalists had abandoned their work abruptly, leaving mid-sentence, their tools of the trade left behind like the ruins of some forgotten battlefield. The realization sent a shiver through me. Whatever had driven them away had come suddenly and without warning. We moved cautiously into another room, which we guessed had been the editing room. Articles were taped to the walls, their yellowed pages whispering forgotten stories. 2 windows overlooked the desolate town below, offering a haunting panorama of Angel Lake's abandoned streets. My friend lingered by the window, but I found myself drawn to the editor's desk. A towering stack of newspapers sat atop it, untouched and unnervingly neat, as if the editor had placed them there moments before stepping out and never returned. I reached out to sift through the papers, but as my hand hovered over them, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. A creeping chill swept over me, as if something unseen had just entered the room or had been watching us all along. I glanced back at my friend, watching as he rifled through the contents of the desk, papers fluttering and falling like whispers of the past. For a fleeting moment, I felt a strange exhilaration as I held in my trembling hands a newspaper nearly 80 years old. Its ink was vivid, its photographs hauntingly sharp, as though the decades hadn't touched it. My eyes caught the headline, "Strange Fog Spotted in the Middle of Angel Lake." A chill surged through me, an inexplicable unease settling deep in my chest. My gaze drifted to the window, drawn toward the lake mentioned in the article. Even in the fading light, the water appeared unnaturally dark, a stillness to its surface that defied nature. It wasn't calm, it was stagnant, like a gaping maw waiting for prey. The sight unnerved me, yet I couldn't look away. Finally, I tore my eyes from the lake and returned to the article, a gnawing curiosity compelling me to read on. October 11th. An unexplainable fog was spotted forming in the middle of Angel Lake. Witnesses claim it emerged without warning, accompanied by strange and frightening noises echoing from the water. A faint, otherworldly light emanates from the core of the fog. Local law enforcement and fishermen attempted to investigate, but were driven back by a nauseating stench emanating from the phenomenon. Officials have promised further attempts once the smell subsides. The words sent a shiver crawling up my spine. I flipped through the crumbling pages, finding more articles clustered nearby, each dated mere days apart. My hands quaked slightly as I sorted them in chronological order, compelled by a mix of fascination and dread. The next report made my pulse quicken. October 19th. The fog has now enveloped most of Angel Lake, creeping onto the shores and into the neighboring woodlands. Residents fear it will soon reach the town itself, as it shows no sign of retreating. The smell has grown unbearable, and citizens report bizarre flashes of multicolored lights deep within the mist, accompanied by unnerving, discordant noises in the dead of night. Many claim the sounds are like screams, inhuman and agonizing. The mayor has issued an advisory. All citizens are to remain indoors until further notice. I could almost hear those screams as I read, the imagined sound clawing at the edges of my sanity. My breathing quickened, and I realized my hands were trembling, the newspaper shaking like a leaf in a storm. Forcing myself to continue, I picked up the next article, dated November 5th. The air in the room seemed heavier, colder, as though the very act of reading was summoning something unseen. November 5th. The fog has not receded. Instead, it has crept into Angel Lake streets, suffocating the town in its grasp. Residents have begun vanishing under mysterious circumstances. Witnesses describe their loved ones stepping outside, drawn to the fog as if hypnotized, and walking into its depths. Their final moments are marked by blood-curdling screams before they are swallowed completely, leaving no trace. Even animals are not spared. Cattle, birds, and woodland creatures are found dead near the mist's edge, their bodies grotesquely decayed. The foliage, too, is rotting, as though the very land is succumbing to this spreading blight. A cold sweat broke out on my brow as I processed the implications of what I was reading. Could this cursed fog have been the cause of the town's abandonment? Or worse, had the town never truly been abandoned at all? The thought twisted my stomach, and I glanced nervously toward the window. The lake outside loomed like a black abyss, the memory of its unnatural stillness fresh in my mind. My fingers brushed the brittle edge of the paper, and I realized they were trembling more violently than before. I hadn't even noticed at first, so absorbed in the dreadful accounts that I'd lost track of myself. With a shaky breath, I put the article down and glanced over at my friend. He was still sifting through papers, oblivious to the growing sense of menace that seemed to pulse through the air like a living thing. But I could feel it now. Something was wrong, something beyond explanation. And for the first time since arriving, I wished desperately to leave. As I scanned the ominous room, my friend wandered into the editor's office. His startled cry shattered the oppressive silence, and the newspaper slipped from my trembling hands. My heart pounded as he called out to me, his voice strained with something I couldn't yet name. When I joined him, his expression mirrored mine, wide-eyed terror, skin pale as though the blood had drained from it entirely. "What's wrong?" he stammered, though his own voice betrayed that he knew. He didn't wait for my answer, turning toward the grimy window. His palms pressed flat against the pane as he stared out at the lake. Hesitantly, I moved to the other window, compelled by the same morbid fascination. The scene outside was death made manifest. The trees surrounding Angel Lake stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches gnarled and stripped bare. The grass and underbrush were brittle and brown, as if the life had been leached from the land. And the lake, the lake. It was an abyss, black and fathomless, its surface unnervingly still, as though the water itself refused to move. I could almost hear it whispering, luring us closer with promises of madness. I turned back to the desk, seeking an escape from the dreadful scene outside. My hands found another newspaper, its edges yellowed and brittle, and I read it aloud to my friend, who had reluctantly returned to the desk. His color drained further with every word, his posture hunched as if the weight of our discovery was physically crushing him. November 14th. The infernal mist has overtaken Angel Lake entirely. Authorities have begun evacuating the town, but many fear it is already too late. The fog's origin remains unknown, but it is now considered deadly. Crops have withered and grown deformed, their once vital flesh twisted into grotesque shapes. Animals suffer similar fates, their bodies decaying as though consumed by some invisible plague. Worse still, residents have fallen into inexplicable trances, wandering into the mist as if summoned, never to return. Witnesses report hearing their final screams, inhuman, guttural cries, before silence devours them. The stench believed to emanate from the fog itself has grown unbearable. The fate of Angel Lake is sealed. We leave this account as a warning to anyone who may stumble upon our town. Turn back while you still can. I placed the paper back on the desk, arranging the collection as I had found it. It felt like an act of reverence, or perhaps desperation, some feeble attempt to honor the lives lost here. My friend and I exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't an academic expedition anymore. This was a descent into something far darker, far worse than either of us had anticipated. My eyes wandered around the room, desperate for anything that could further explain what had happened. That's when I saw it, a typewriter in the corner, its keys dulled with age. It held a sheet of paper, slightly yellowed but still intact. Intrigued and terrified, I approached it cautiously. The text was messy, rushed, the ink smudged as though typed in frantic haste. I leaned over to read the words, and the air seemed to freeze around me. The damned fog, it's not just vapor, it's alive. It's not just taking people, it's consuming them. The toxic fumes kill everything, plants, animals, everything it touches. It's some kind of devilish power overtaking Angel Lake. I leave this note to warn anyone who finds it. If you are here, get out, now. If you stay another moment, may God have mercy on you. The words ended abruptly, leaving an echo of dread in the air. My legs trembled so violently I could barely stand. My chest tightened as if the fog itself were squeezing the breath from my lungs. The silence in the room felt deafening, yet I could almost hear the sound of the typist's last frantic keystrokes. Then, a piercing scream split the air. I spun around, my heart thundering. My friend was still at the window, his face twisted in an expression of pure terror. For a moment, I couldn't move. Fear paralyzed me, rooting me to the spot. His scream was cut off suddenly, leaving behind an even more terrifying silence. Slowly, I turned my gaze to the lake and my blood turned to ice. Something was moving in the mist. I'd never felt such an unbearable bone-deep cold before. It wasn't just my skin. It was as if the chill had reached into my very soul, seizing my body in a suffocating grip. Even breathing felt like a monumental task, the air dense and oppressive. Over and over, I heard my friend calling my name, his voice trembling on the edge of a sob, rising with hysteria. His fear was contagious, pressing on me like a physical weight, and it snapped me out of my frozen state. Spinning around, I demanded to know what had terrified him so. But he didn't answer. He couldn't. His face, pale as death, was locked in an expression of pure, primal terror. He could only raise a trembling hand and point toward Angel Lake. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave this accursed place and never look back. But something stronger, a dark, insidious curiosity, forced me to turn toward the window. The sight that met me defied reason, defied anything I'd ever read or imagined. The lake, black and still as death moments before, was now alive with an unnatural phenomenon. A thick, milky fog began to rise from its surface, but it didn't drift like ordinary mist. No, this fog moved. It writhed and coiled like some massive serpentine creature, slithering with malevolent purpose. And the colors the colors shifted and flashed within it, violent and unnatural, like lightning trapped in a storm cloud. It wasn't just a mist, it was alive, and it was hunting. The fog surged toward the shoreline, not drifting but advancing, as though it had become aware of us. I stood transfixed, my mind racing and blank all at once. My legs refused to obey me, rooted to the spot as my pulse roared in my ears. The newspaper articles and the frenzied note on the typewriter replayed in my head like a chant, their warnings now horrifyingly real. Behind me, my friend's panic scream broke the spell. His voice snapped me back to myself, and I turned to see him bolting for the door. Fear overtook me, and I followed, tripping over ancient furniture, stumbling over the supposed treasures of this cursed town. The air inside felt heavy, charged with something that was almost sentient. Each door I shoved open seemed to resist, as if the building itself wanted to keep me trapped. We burst outside, gasping for air, but what greeted us was no reprieve. The atmosphere was thick with a nauseating stench, rotten and chemical, an assault on the senses. It clung to us, suffocating, and made my throat burn with every desperate breath. Overhead, the sky churned with unnatural light, eerie strobes that danced and flickered like a malignant intelligence. The mist was gaining ground, creeping faster now, and it was no longer silent. A low, guttural groan reverberated from behind us, a sound so otherworldly it clawed at my sanity. Then came the screeches and human wails that rose and fell in dissonant, maddening waves. They were cries of torment, of hunger, of something that should not exist. My legs moved on their own, carrying me faster than I thought possible. My friend was ahead, his figure a blur as we sprinted toward the edge of town. The noises behind us grew louder, closer, as though the mist was mocking our futile escape. Just as we reached the outskirts, I made the mistake of glancing back. The fog had consumed the town. Every building was shrouded in its writhing, multicolored depths, swallowed by a vortex of shifting light and shadow. And in the fog, for one fleeting, nightmarish moment, I saw it a face. It was monstrous, warped, and inhumanly vast. Its grotesque features shifted like the colors around it, its eyes burning with an unholy hunger that froze me in place. I could feel it staring at us, its gaze a crushing weight, and I knew it wanted us. It wanted to consume us. Somehow we made it to the car. My friend didn't hesitate, slamming the door and speeding down the desolate road as if the devil himself was chasing us. Neither of us spoke. We couldn't. The horror we had just escaped hung in the silence like a specter, suffocating and unrelenting. Even now I can't shake it. Whenever a fog rolls in, I feel the panic rise, a primal fear that grips me as if the mist from Angel Lake has found me again. I wonder, late at night when the memories refuse to let me rest, if anyone escaped that monstrous fog, or if the town's inhabitants were consumed, just as the final desperate warning had claimed. No one ever speaks of Angel Lake, no records, no interviews, no descendants to claim its cursed legacy. It's as though the town itself was erased, swallowed by the mist and forgotten. And yet, the thought that chills me the most is this: what if the mist isn't gone? What if it's only waiting?